Our next presenters are Christine Westerlund and Amy Byers. Christine Westerlund is the Vice President of the Chatham Area Public Library Board of Trustees, and she's previously served as their board president. Christine is the Director of Professional Development for the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies. Additionally, she manages the association's Professional Development Institute, a multidisciplined catalog of training and learning opportunities for the Illinois Community Action Network. Christine has over 30 years of experience working with governmental entities and nonprofit organizations as a researcher, grant writer, facilitator, and trainer. Amy Byers has been the director of the Chatham Area Public Library since 2009. And before that, she was reference librarian and adult programs coordinator at the library. Amy is an active member of the Illinois library community, serving as a mentor for the Directors University, a program that trains new public library directors for their new executive roles. Amy also serves on the Finance and Policy Committee of the SHARE Consortium, Sharing Heartland's Available Resources Equally. Take it away, Christine and Amy.
Well, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. I think this conversation that we're going to have today, the first step in this is being active and want to learn more. So you're already doing that just by being here. So kudos to you for that. We're going to start. We have two separate parts to this conversation, and Christine is going to start us off. So I'm going to turn it to her.
All right. Well, and Amy, you'll help me advance the slides. All right. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. As Amy said, we are delighted to be with you this morning on your Saturday. And I just really want to give a shout out to the Illinois Library Association. I also want to give a shout out to Amy, who makes being a library board member actually just such a treat. And to really kind of work and share with you some of the insights that I have gained over the years in working with boards, which I have done since I was 17 years old. And I have seen a lot of interesting things over the past several years. And the one thing that I think it always comes back to is this idea of communication. And I know that we are sharing virtual space today, but the idea of communication is probably the key factor in building that relationship between board and library director. And you'll see in this word cloud, I know that we see these everywhere. They're actually become kind of what, ubiquitous, I guess maybe is the word I want. But we see within this word cloud, we see the word communication, obviously. And within that, how is it that we listen? How is it that we pay attention during these meetings, not just to what the library director is sharing with us, but to listening to one another as board members? And we do that, we do effective listening. That means we're listening in, we're not waiting to respond. That means that we try to be culturally aware, that we express empathy, that we consider our nonverbal communication whenever we are doing that, and to really just show up. And I think that's the key piece within this relationship. I know that the library director administers, the library board governs. And that is where the relationship, I think, needs to be very clear, and that the boundaries need to be very defined between the library director and the staff and the board members. So just kind of hold on to that little nugget, if you will, and we'll go ahead and move forward. So it is that boundary question. And we all have those, we all kind of work within this framework of boundaries. And the easiest way that I like to depict this is to stay in your lane. And because it's that lane that really helps us understand that when we're taking forward action, that if we make a decision from a place of governance, because we are board trustees, we hold the public's trust. And we have to keep all of the public in mind whenever we are taking action. And the library director does that as well, in which the consideration for the institution itself, understanding the mission of the library, if there is a library strategic plan, and there should be, understanding what's in that plan to understand that we have to move forward together in that relationship. But again, we're governing, which means that we have oversight over the entire library, but it is the library director who is head of staff, who implements all these decisions, who gives us advice and wisdom. We don't know when an air conditioner is going to break down, or we don't know whenever there's been an issue with a library patron. Is that word even still used? Is it okay? Amy is nodding in affirmation. So to be very mindful of that boundary and to constantly remind yourself as a library board member how important that boundary is. We cannot overreach. We cannot be friends. You know, we can't recommend a friend to be employed here. I remember years ago, my son said, I have a great idea. I want you to get me a job at the library. And I said, absolutely not. I can't do that. And I will not do that. And, you know, again, these are things that we have to understand, that when we begin doing that, then we begin going down that slippery slope. And so it's important that we have these boundaries in place and we remind ourselves of these boundaries all the time. And this really is kind of that balance between why and how we do this, right? So as a library board member, we're advocates for the library. You know, I'm constantly, when a new family, just on boots on the ground, out walking the dog, when there's a new family in our neighborhood, I always stop by and invite them to come to the library. We have to also take that advocacy at all those other levels as well, you know, whether it is there's some legislation that gets introduced, or if there are actions by surrounding communities that may impact the library's funding or actions, that we have to be that advocate to support the library, to advocate on behalf of the library, to really plead our case. We also have to take on planning for the future, and that is strategic planning. That is something that all libraries, all institutions should be doing. And in my professional work, I spend a lot of time talking about strategic plans and working on strategic plans. And I know the value of them they're just something that really pushes the organization, the library, forward. So that planning for the future is essential. That we monitor and evaluate all the overall effectiveness of the library. So you receive, as a board member, you should be receiving reports filled with lots of numbers about all sorts of things. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but what I appreciate the most about that is that I understand with quite a bit of detail how well this library is performing. And the one thing that the director does as well is points out to us whenever there are not only victories, but when there are deficiencies. And that's an opportunity to have a discussion at a board meeting to say, well, what can we do to maybe, you know, move forward? Or what are the library director's ideas? The other piece of it is, because this is public money, we are a public institution, so we have to have a high level of accountability, not just to the taxpayers, but to the entire community. And those are stakeholders, of course. And that we also have to be very transparent. You know, that's why we follow, you know, the Open Meetings Act, the Freedom of Information Act. We want to make sure that the actions that we are taking are in the public view. And I think that's important for us to really understand the value of that. And I think it gives us a higher level and sense of duty whenever we are governing. We also adopt these library policies. Again, this is, I think, really important for the library to consider that, especially now, whenever we are having quite a bit of conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion, to really examine those policies to see, you know, are there places that we need to take a shift to perhaps make a better policy, if that's even a proper phrase to say. And then the other thing that library boards do is that we hire and evaluate the library director. Again, the library director reports to the board, the rest of the staff reports to the library director. And just to, again, be very clear about that boundary. So there are three basic duties that we need to be aware of as a library board member. That you really have to exercise reasonable care. And what does that mean? That means you're being prudent. So you're showing up at board meetings, you know, and if you can't get there, you're alerting, you know, the director that you cannot be there. You're also showing independent judgment. You know, you are on the board, you know, perhaps there was a vacancy and you were named for the board. I know that we go through an application process to make this happen. So we've been vetting ourselves to ensure that we want to be a part of this organization. We also want to be informed about what are some of the resources that we have available to us. And that's just not finance, that's, do we have staff that are well trained? Do we have the capacity to fulfill our mission, to understand that we really care about the organization? Again, we delegate only to responsible individuals with that duty of care. And we also have a responsibility to ask those follow-up questions to say, tell me what happened, because that's important, because we care about the organization. We also have the duty of loyalty. And that means you're not doing any of this for your own personal gain. Everything is for the interest of the organization. So it's that phrase there, undivided allegiance, that might be a scary sort of phrase. But what it is that, if I own a stationery company and I ask the library to buy all their stationery needs from me, well, then I am violating this duty of loyalty. And again, do stationery companies even still exist? Again, just a rhetorical question. So we cannot put personal, family, or business interests above the organization's interests. And I think that's really a critical thing to hang on to, is that we are loyal to the organization. Just as much as we advocate on behalf of the organization, we also demonstrate loyalty. And we want to not only avoid any conflict of interest, but that is in fact and in appearance. There can't even be a hint of a conflict of interest within this work that we do as board members in maintaining that relationship. And then finally, and this is the word that people find a little scary, is this duty of obedience, that you are faithful to the mission of the organization. That is why a mission statement and revisiting that mission statement over and over again builds that faithfulness, that obedience to the mission, that you're not veering outside of your mission. You have to ensure that you are acting consistently with the organization's goals. Again, we can't veer off an off-ramp because, we have an opportunity to accept some money, let's say from a library donor, but there's conditions attached to that. They may ask us to do something that simply does not align with the library's mission. And that's just a very broad example, but these are things that we do see in this work. And we are trusted by the public. Again, the word trustee, I know I'm being a bit repetitive here, but we are entrusted by the public to manage not only tax dollars, but any donated money to the library to fulfill our mission. Again, underscoring that value of mission. So again, we're obedient to the central purpose, and we have accountabilities in place. We really want to know what's going on. Again, we have policies, we have programs, we want to know about performance. That's where data really plays a big role in this. We want to understand process, but again, we don't implement those processes unless it's from a governance perspective. And we want to understand the value of the library. What are our outcomes? Are we being effective? Are we efficient? Do we have economies within that we're looking at to try to, because it's not a limitless pot of money. And we also have to, because of that, we have to really be connected to planning and to follow up on that planning to ensure that we're not only implementing, but we're also evaluating. And it really all comes back to this all the time, right? It's all about communication. It's about listening. It's about trying to gain value within that relationship, to understand that this is a relationship that is always focused on power with, not power over. And I cannot say enough about that, because when we see things starting to go off the rails, and I'm not referring to anything, with any library that I'm aware of, but when we see it in institutions, when power over becomes the driving force, then that's when we know that that institution probably is destined to work its way towards failure. So this is a power with relationship. And that is really based on good communication on all levels.
All right.
Now, Amy.
Yay. Thank you, Christine. And I forgot to mention when we first started this, I know there's been a couple of questions, and we're our favorite part of this whole presentation that we do here is we go over our parts, and then we have a pretty robust Q&A time. So we're excited to see your questions and be able to talk to you more on that level very soon. So keep going with your questions. We're happy to go there. So we're going to move on to the director side of things and what trustees can do to help directors in their roles. But first, before we do that, we kind of need to talk about what does a library director do? We have a lot of new trustees on this Zoom today. And so you might not know, and every library is different, just like Jamie said, there's differences in budgets and municipalities and districts and levies and all of that. There's differences in what staff do at the library and what the library director does. There's some libraries, it's a one-man show. So they're doing everything. They're doing cataloging, they're doing all the legal requirements, they're doing, they're staffing the desk. And there's some that have a staff of 300. And so their world is very, very different. But on the whole, as Christine said, there's still certain things that works with the board to the library director. And then if there is staff, it goes to the staff through that process. So these are just several things, several areas where we really focus in my position of what we do. So there's a lot of different angles, for myself, I have to make sure that the building's standing. We have to make sure that we're following all laws, especially as laws change, sometimes very quickly in this state, all personnel issues. So in task management, it doesn't get talked about a lot, but really making sure that everyone is performing the task correctly and making sure that, what they're doing is appropriate for the library and moving us forward. Technology, marketing, long-term planning. We've talked a lot about long-term planning, but that really is crucial because we have to know where we're going. And with libraries and technology, things keep changing all the time. And we have to be aware of those changes and adapt and see how all of those things fit for our community. So it's not just, ooh, there's a new bright, shiny thing. Is that bright, shiny thing appropriate for our community? So there's a lot of questions that you have to kind of answer as you go on. And community engagement, that's very important. A library director should be out and visible in the community. We should be talking to stakeholders. We should be going to events. We should be aware of what's happening. And a good example of that during the COVID time, I was part of a group that the fire chief, the police chief, the village manager, churches, school district, we all came together and talked about how our community is going to get through COVID. So knowing those stakeholders beforehand, I knew all those people, but it was nice that there was already that comfort level of knowing each other and how we can all work together to move things forward. So that's a little bit about what we do, but how can you help? So you hired the library director to do that job. So it might be a lot, but that's what the job is. And it's exciting and it's diverse and that's why we like it. But that's our job to do. You trust us to handle that job. And so let us go through that. But if we have problems, if we have victories, we're going to share them. That's our part about that communication piece. That's important that we are communicating both pluses and negatives. We actually just had I do an orientation every time we have a new trustee. And during that process, we talk about all these great things that the library does. And then I said, okay, let me tell you about the problems we're having. Let me tell you about what their issues really are, because coming onto a new board and not knowing what those problems are, you don't know how to help when you don't know what's under the rug. So I got to tell her all of our wonderful leaking of the building, all the water issues and fun stuff like that. So she learned a lot right there before she even had to step onto the board for that comfort of understanding what we're doing. And then earlier and on our day, Jamie talked about policy and how we work together on developing policy. And one policy that is really important as we talk about communication and roles that we didn't have for most of my time here was on budget thresholds. So when I came on to this position, I asked our board president at the time, I said, what's my threshold? How much money can I spend without board approval? And he said, I don't know, $1,000? I think it was more of $1,000 at the question mark at the end. He was assuming that that's what it was, but it was never communicated on the board level what that threshold should be. So when we started looking at our financial policies, we said, wait, let's talk about this. So as my job, I went and I researched other libraries. What are their thresholds? What's their budgets? How does that make sense for other libraries? I brought that back to the committee. We talked about it. So I'm part of that conversation. It's not just, here's your threshold and you don't have any say in it. I bring that discussion to the board. Here's your examples. How do you all feel? Where should we be? And so we talked about what that threshold, how that makes sense for our library and our budget. And it was written down. So now me or the next person will have that confidence of knowing how much they can spend on their own, how much they need to spend without going to the RFP process. So that's really important. But you see how important policy communication is. It's a back and forth of what makes sense for myself or the staff or just the organization. And how does the trustees really fit together and making sure that that's correct, how they see it as well. So communications is good, policies are good, but trust us that we are here to help and we're here to work together. And so that's a big part of what you can do to help us. Also, you have a lot of wonderful personal and professional backgrounds that I don't have. And I value them so much. So come to those board meetings, come and share those experiences and background that I just don't have. One example, several years ago, we had a CPA on our board and we were talking about some financial things. And he said, you know, it'd be really easy. It's better for you in accounting wise if you do this type of petty cash system, this type of way of using the credit card. Real basic things, but I don't know that. And just having that knowledge that, you know, just benefits the organization in a way that I wouldn't know to ask some of those questions. So him coming and just saying, hey, I can help you, just give you some advice on some things is really important. So you all have those backgrounds. You might not, you have all, if it's not personal, or I'm sorry, it's not professional, you have personal experiences. How are you using the space? It's good to know just what you hear anecdotally too around town. So those experiences are so valuable. And that's really the benefit of all coming together and having those conversations about what to do. And you want to do more? Great. As Christine said, come prepared to those board meetings or the committee meetings or whatever areas we're talking about. You know, there's a lot that comes out of that. I usually give pretty lengthy board packets. There's a lot of information in there. And reading all of that before we come, just like you did in school, you had to do the homework before you came and discussed it with the class, right? It's the same thing. Reading all of those, the documents, the reports, all of those things, coming prepared really makes a better conversation. And ask questions. I won't know all the answers. And that's okay. It's sometimes difficult for new directors to acknowledge that we don't know everything, and that's okay. But we're also librarians. What are librarians good at? They're good at finding resources. They're good at finding information. They're good at asking the right questions. So if you ask questions and I don't know the answer, it's my duty to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And it's my job to go and research that or find that out or ask that professional that's going to come back and share that with the board. And really just having that time to ask good questions to your director about, you know, you haven't heard a lot about this plan or this issue or this thing. Ask, hey, how is that thing going? I know Christine asked not that long ago, hey, how's that strategic plan going? And I'll be honest, we were almost done. But then the pandemic happened and I dropped it so fast. And so having just kind of guiding questions help say, oh yeah, I need to bring that back again and have a plan of how I'm going to actually finish that sucker. So it's important to have those conversations and those questions being asked. And as Christine said, understand our boundaries. We can have good cordial relationships, but understanding that I shouldn't expect the board to be my friend just as much as the other way around. We have to keep those boundaries in line because it makes it a lot harder if things go awry later on down the road. throat, so that's not good. One thing that I really appreciate about how our board structure is our board president and I have I call it a mini meeting, a meeting before the meeting, where I have the board packet done, I have the agendas done. We come together and we talk about the entire packet. So if it just happened actually this last for the board meeting we have tomorrow, he said, should this part of the agenda be in here? Should we be doing this part? And I said, and we talked about it, and I said, well, I don't know. I wanted to get your feedback. Should we talk about this issue or should we table it for later? We ultimately decided together that we should table it for later. But again, it wasn't him just saying, no, this shouldn't be on here. And it's not me saying, yes, it should. It was a communication. So having that little mini meeting before the meeting is so valuable to me. And I know that our board presidents, right, Christine, also feel the value too, because then you know where we're coming from. And coming into that meeting, having kind of understanding each other before we have to kind of explain what we're talking about just really helps, because then you have that cohesion essentially between the two of us. So that's really, really important. The board president also sets the tone of the meeting. So there's sometimes, I'm sure everyone's been in board meetings, not on the library board, of course, but other boards where things go off the rails. You'll have a trustee or a board member who is talking and then the topic goes way over, you know, it's not even where we're at anymore. That's the board president's job, to bring that back into the conversation. Be concise about what the meeting is. You don't want to have 3-hour meetings. So, and you want to be respectful of everyone's opinion, but you have to stick to the agenda. The agenda is where you go and you can't deviate. So be aware of what the discussion topics are. If you are not a board president or and you want to make sure there's topics that are discussed on that board in that board agenda, you should have something in your bylaws to explain how that process works. But you're not going to talk about, hey, I have a new thing I want to talk about on this agenda when it hasn't been already, it's not already part of a set agenda that's already been done. Does that make sense? So that's really important. So the board president is a really powerful position to really guide your board forward in each meeting, but also the content of what happens in those meetings. So they're pretty darn great. Anything else? Well, Christine already talked about this, but advocate. You all know so much about the library. You know every little stat, every little report, but also you're using the space. You love the library. That's why you're a library trustee. So you have all of this great background and this experience, and so share it with everyone you know. That's the best way to support us moving forward. If you're talking about a referendum or a building expansion or anything big kind of coming down the road, we'll start generating that advocacy now so you can build that community of strong supporters for the library moving forward. So you are our voice. You get to share the information that we're doing in here and say how great you are, because you are. And everyone in town needs to know it. So go ahead and shout it from the rafters. So that's our presentation. We're really excited to be here and talk to you all. So I'm going to share, so Christine can come in the picture with us, and we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Amy, I really like what you said about the library board has to be what I like to call the horn tutors, meaning that you are always sharing the outcomes and the positive outcomes of the library with the community. And, I take great pride in this library. It's an amazing space and place to come to learn and grow. And if we didn't have libraries, I think libraries are the best representation of democracy, boots on the ground in the community. And so being a library trustee is not just an honor, but it's a privilege.
So what questions do you have for us?
You got for us?
All right, we've got a few for you.
Righty.
The first one is, when the board is evaluating the library director, is it acceptable to have the managers and leadership evaluate the library director?
That's a great question. And that we have done that here in the past. We did not do that in the most recent evaluation. And I think it's really up to the library, the board president and the library director to kind of maybe have a conversation about that. to see what some good practices are out there in the network would be. Again, there is value to hearing from the staff because that, the library trustees or that committee may not know some of the things that, that they're, they need to have insight into what the library director is on a day-to-day basis. So I think, again, it's really up to the library board to make that decision. Amy?
Yeah, and like you said, that we've done it both ways. I know the first several years that I was here, that was a pretty good component to really understanding where I was with the staff. And so that decision later on might have been different if I was still new, so it depends on where you are with your director as well, I think.
And honestly, when we did talk to the staff, and I remember I was the one that was compiling many of those responses, that we knew that Amy was doing a great job because we got, just really a lot of really good positive responses. But, your story may be different.
Our next question, is it appropriate for a board member to be in the library every day and questioning staff members, which takes them away from their regular duties?
I would say it's not appropriate. I think that's an overreach, an overstep, whatever you want to call it, but it is not up for that library board member to do that. That is behavior that perhaps the board president needs to take up with that trustee. Hopefully it's not the board president. But that it does need to be addressed. The library is here and open to the public, so focusing their attention on a board member is not only a distraction, but a disservice to the public.
Yeah, I knew a library director who had their former director come in and just plop down and just chat with them all day. And then I've also had board member, not here, but heard of other libraries that have their trustees just plop down and chat because they got nothing to do. They want to see what's going on and they want to support the library. However, there's a lot of work to be done in the library. And so respecting those boundaries are important.
Our next question is, what is your advice for a new trustee to build a strong relationship with the director?
Well, I'm going to go back to listening and communicating. You really want to, listen into what's being shared at board meetings. You want to be paying attention to if a question is asked of the library director, is the library director responding to that question or brings it back again to a following meeting or perhaps alerts folks to say, this is, someone asked this question, this is when I have found out about it. So there does have to be that cycle of communication in place, and it has to be good communication.
It's also nice just to understand that you're both human, and it's good to know, how's your family doing? And that's what I like about our orientation. I might not know that person very well, but during that orientation process, I know, oh, they've got 2 kids, they live, you get better understanding of that person, then you're more comfortable talking to them when there's issues or just having the communication, just better communication between each other.
Yeah, I think building rapport is really important. We have to know about one another. Chatham is not the small community that it used to be. There's a lot more people that live here, so we don't know everybody. But by the same token, we want to know enough about somebody so we understand who they are and what path are they on.
All right, we have a few questions in the chat. Regarding appearance of conflict, should it be disclosed when a family member is a volunteer in the library? Not a role that is overseen by any way by the board, but a role within the library nonetheless.
I think it's fine if there is a family member who is a volunteer, but again, just to be very conscious about that boundary, and if there is any, again, overstep or overreach, that has to be addressed right away. And I think it has to be addressed right away with not only with the family member and the board member.
Okay, our next question. Do you have any thoughts on how board members can support the library in fundraising efforts?
Well, that's a great, I'd like to say that's the $1 million question. Well, one thing, and Amy, chime in here. So one thing that we do have a foundation, that we have a foundation board, which we have, what, 2 members of the library board that are like kind of ex officio on there?
There's 1 ex officio and 2 members.
2, okay. Thank you. I used to be on that board, so obviously I forgot all the details. But I think the library board members do have to play a role in fundraising if there is a role. But again, we have to be also very conscientious, of that fundraising. What is the intention of that fundraising? Is it in support of the library? And to, ensure that there is a committee or some level of oversight over that, that the board plays a small role in, but it really has independent oversight.
Yeah, and you could talk more about when we went out and we were doing the building expansion, and we did have the foundation did a lot of fundraising, but there was still that foundation board that did a lot of that push. It wasn't the board members proper. Is that fair?
That's very fair. Right. Again, I think, having that whole layer of having that, whether you establish a foundation or having a separate committee to handle that there has to be that layer of separation. So again, another boundary issue that we need to be very mindful of.
But I will say, because we have a foundation, we have a friends group as well. And the friends group, have book sales, they have other fundraising type things and throughout the year, and having the board just support them in that way is just a nice way to, one, support our volunteer friends group, but also just become a part of the library even more. So that's a nice piece as well. And it's easy, just buy some books at a book sale. That's good.
The next question, a point raised about boundaries is concerning as to functioning in the capacity as a committee chairperson. Particularly during committee meetings, is the chair of the committee responsible for leading the meeting and therefore reporting out to the board meeting?
Yes. I mean, it's intentional, understanding the question correctly. It is the chair of that committee that is responsible not only for bringing the committee together to meet, but to ensure that that action, if action is being taken, it's noted that minutes are being taken and shared to be included in the board packet, and then to report on the action or the proceedings of what happened within that committee itself.
Great, and those are all the questions we have right now.
Great. Those are all great questions.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like everyone's boards are just running so smoothly, and that's wonderful. Gay libraries.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add on that, sometimes there is conflict in libraries, library boards, where, the board members may see something from different perspectives. And actually, if it is civil discourse within that conflict, then there's nothing to discourage that behavior. As library trustees, we have to be able to make informed decisions to look at all aspects of an issue before we take a vote. And by bringing those ideas and issues forward, really make the board function better. It improves the process and improves the outcome.
But also, if that outcome is something that you disagree with, you as a trustee or you as a director, it doesn't matter. If it got voted on and that's the path we're taking, you don't need to go and complain about it to staff or to other trustees. It's the path forward, and you need to kind of move in that direction and support the organization as a whole instead of just worry about the 1 or 2 things that you didn't care for.
And I just want to go back and emphasize something that Amy said, is that within your board of trustees, everybody comes with different backgrounds, and yeah, we've had a CPA. Our current board president is an attorney, and that has been very helpful in the work that we do. And all of us bring different strengths and perspectives. Because that, and we're here because we love the library. We want to serve this library. We want to ensure that the public's needs are met. And that's where we, again, as a unit, we have to meet, and we have to have conversation meetings about what's going on. And sometimes those meetings can last a while, particularly budget meetings, because that's where the rubber meets the road. The one thing I have to applaud Amy during the pandemic, doing all these planning, how to stage it to reopen the library. She was very thorough. She checked in with colleagues. She checked in certainly with the governor's office to see what were some of the mandates there, and to ensure that she not only kept, the library staff safe and free from COVID, but also individuals who wanted to use this library. And we got a couple of letters of complaint. And again, we listened, read those letters, and took into account of what was being shared with us. And again, it's important that we keep those channels of communication. If we could just really within every structure that we have, if we have this idea that we can actually talk with one another, share our concerns, and talk through those concerns, I think that honestly, governance would improve everywhere. But that's magical thinking in some ways on my part.
I will say one thing that Christine does really well is when she was our board president, we did have a complaint on social media, and the response that Christine gave is something I keep back in my head whenever I need to go to it. But essentially, she said, "Well, let's come into the library. Let's talk about that issue." And so that gives that opening to actually have that dialogue with whatever issue that was. And essentially that person, did they even respond?
No.
Yeah. So it takes care of that, but it gets it off that ugliness of social media that can happen, and makes it, you're just neighbors now, and so it moves into that point. So that's a little bit of a detour, but there's a lot of components to being a trustee that you have to think about.
The other piece of that, Amy, is if you have the willingness to issue the invitation, regardless of, if it's a complaint or if it's a compliment or if it's an issue that needs to be discussed, I think as a library trustee, we take the initiative to open up that conversation because we need to hear from you. We want to know what your concerns are. We want to know that something great happened at the library. We want to hear everything if we possibly can.
We've had a few more questions come in. If a board trustee has a book published during their term of service, should the library not put it in the collection to avoid any appearance of conflict?
Well, that's a great question.
I would first look at the collection development policy and see if it would even fit into those terms. That'd be a first start. That's a hard one.
That's a slippery slope.
It's perceived even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My first reaction was, and true confession here, I had a similar issue pop up in my workplace in which we had a board member publish a book. And so there was a big push for me to purchase several copies of his book and do a big distribution of it. And I resisted because I thought it was a bit of a boundary cross. That it wasn't up to me to make that decision, and it was not up to this individual to encourage me to do it. So I think it's a case by case, but if there is policy in place on how you develop the collection, that is always what you point to is that policy.
It does put the director in a pretty bad bind though, because it's either, yes, I have to essentially to say yes. It makes them feel that way, at least, it puts us in a bind. I'll just say that.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it is they want the book in the collection. They could donate the book rather than the library purchase it. But again, does that violate or, intrude on whatever that collection policy could be?
We have a related question on conflict of interest. Is it a conflict of interest if I offer my medical services on a volunteer basis to the library staff?
I think I'd probably need to know a little bit more about that. Is that something like
Flu shot?
Yeah, flu shot, or I thought maybe blood pressure checks or what have you.
I would be curious if you had a colleague or, who maybe could be that person. I just worry about, again, that board staff component kind of coming in. I know that you're trying to help. So it's,
Yeah, I get it. And, the other piece of it that would worry me would be HIPAA, because, if it's simply just for like wellness checks or, things like that, personal private information should not be shared about medical conditions.
Okay, a follow-up to the fundraising question. Regarding fundraising on the foundation and the board, I'm sorry, let me start that again. Regarding the fundraising on the foundation and the board members on both boards, would you encourage elected board members not to be on the fundraising committees for the foundation? Or would it be appropriate for the member of both boards to be on the fundraising committees?
Well, I have to say, I think that when we did the fundraising for the library, for the expansion of the library, it was the foundation that led that initiative. And there were library board members that served on that initiative, I being one of them. So again, I think it depends upon the nature of the fundraising. What is the intention of the fundraising? And again, being very clear in the makeup of that committee, that you're following, all the rules, that you're taking minutes, that you're ensuring that, if you're doing fundraising, how is that money being structured and spent? This is where, you would want to probably tap into the legal expertise that you have at the on the library, the attorney that you have on contract, in order to, I think, ask that. I think that really is more of a legal question that I, for one, feel uncomfortable talking more about it. I'll just be quiet.
We have a follow-up on the volunteer potential conflict of interest. The trustee offers to teach CPR on a volunteer basis to library staff.
Well, I like the idea
right.
of being CPR trained. I think that is a good initiative to have in place. And I would assume that this trustee is a certified CPR instructor, which obviously the answer to that is yes. Again, I think checking in with the attorney just to ask that question, is that an overreach? Is that an overstep? And just to be clear, because again, we want to be very, we don't want to begin, moving those boundaries in different directions to fulfill a specific cause.
And then also, if that was appropriate, to just let the director know, hey, I have this skill, would you like, just so not saying, hey, we need to have this training. So, because I might have a complete training schedule for my whole year that it might not fall into, or maybe I already had a plan, or, just having that, if the door can be open to that idea, but not force that idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I really like that, that for staff, you probably do have professional development, and it is the library director that leads that. And if CPR training is on that list and she is certified, again, I think a quick check-in with the attorney just to see if there aren't any conflict of interest issues there to proceed. But yeah, you want to ensure that everything is legal and reported and out there.
Okay, we have time, I think, for just a couple more questions. Is it appropriate as a newly elected trustee to make a special point to introduce myself to individuals on staff and create friendly relationships within the library community?
That's a really great question. I will say I am friendly with the library staff. I don't know all of them personally. I know some of them that have been here for a long time.
During the orientation, I take a tour and I introduce the trustees to the staff that are here. I don't make it a point to say, come back on Tuesday when this person's here or anything like that, but just more of a, hi, here's the new trustee. Here's, here's Karen. Karen does this type of job here at the library. Just real basic, introductions, just so the staff appreciate knowing who the trustees are too. Just knowing who they are. Just it helps humanize a little bit of the board, because sometimes staff don't ever see the board, or they come in, just for the meeting. And so there's just not, you don't want to have a whole lot of interaction, but you can be cordial, you can be friendly. So I don't know if being a trustee coming in on your own, or saying, hey, to the director, would that be appropriate to meet the staff with that?
And I'll just add that it could be, the culture of the library that encourages that, I don't see any boundary problem with that, unless there is an intention beyond just getting to know them.
Okay, we have one more question. There was also a question about recommendations for books for trustees. I do have a list of resources that I will put in the email that you'll be receiving shortly. So I'm going to get to the last question, which is a big one. How do you handle a situation where the board president bullies the rest of the board?
Whew. That is a very difficult question. I'm not quite sure how you can solve that without, number one, consulting with the attorney, but you would have to have some evidence, and you do record your meetings. So that might be something to share, but in terms of behavior, that it's hard to regulate behavior, as we all know. And if there could be an opportunity, I don't know if it's the board vice president needs to be made aware of it, to try to have that conversation with the board president, just saying, hey, here's what I have noticed. But, because of our Open Meeting Act regulations, and we really have to be very conscientious about not meeting without that board president, present. So Amy, I'll defer to what you think.
Well, do you think doing a board evaluation could help? Because then you could have each board member write down, strengths and weaknesses of the board itself, the trustees themselves come together and then say, okay, here's the guidance that we're going to go forward as a board moving forward. And if you say there's not going to be any name calling or, that because all collectively, all together, you're saying that. And I know it's going to be difficult because the board president's still going to be very active in probably having different opinions. That might at least be a start to explaining that the rest of you want to move it in this direction.
I like that idea. There are a lot of great board assessment tools out there, particularly some of those assessments do go as far as examining behavior of board members. And if those other board members would have, if it's a blind survey or a blind assessment, perhaps that would be an opportunity to bring forward some of those issues. In fact, that's probably the best solution would be to do it from that perspective. And Amy, I really appreciate you bringing that forward. And that might be the most comfortable way for everybody to handle it.
And also, at least for us, I assume it's for everyone, we do board elections every 2 years after the election. We do executive position elections. So we'll do that tomorrow, on Monday. And so if there's another nomination for who could be president, then that person, it might not be the president anymore if you can shift that power away from that person, but someone has to step up and take on that leadership role.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Christine and Amy. I'm going to pass it over to Kathy now.
Oh, sorry, I was just starting to type. Excellent presentation, Christine and Amy. Thank you for both what you presented and prepared for us and for addressing a very interesting and diverse set of questions that always seem to come up. And I think you had some really great suggestions on how we can proceed with that. So thank you again. And I would just remind everyone that there will be a survey coming to you. Please fill it out. There's an opportunity to suggest some additional programs in the future that you'd like to see. We do look at that very carefully within the Trustee Forum Board. And if you have an interest in being considered for the Trustee Forum Board, there's also information on the Trustee Forum page of the ILA website addressing an information form and some more details of what we do each year. And if you were thinking about recognizing someone and nominating them to be Trustee of the Year, please consider doing it because today is the deadline. More information again on the website. Thank you especially to Cindy Robinson, our ILA staff member who is the liaison to our forum, for once again providing us with a great organized way for this all to begin and for making sure that all of this took place. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a great rest of your weekend.